Up next, we have Dr. Volkan Isler. Dr. Isler is a professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Texas at Austin. He is also a core member of Texas Robotics. He recently moved to UT after 16 plus years at the University of Minnesota. Since then, he has spent some time in industry. From 2021 to 2023, he was the head of Samsung's AI Center in New York. Dr. Isler's general research area is robotics applied to environmental monitoring and agricultural automation, more recently home automation. He is especially interested in perception-action coupling and network robotics. A lot of his work involves designing, planning algorithms, and perceptual representations, which incorporate sensing, communication, and actuation constraints. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Isler.
Yeah, thank you, April, for the nice introduction, but also for organizing all this. So, hi, everybody. My name is Volkan. I'm the newest faculty member in Texas Robotics. So, in my talk today, should we switch to the presentation mode? Or? This one right here. Cool. Thank you, guys. So I'm going to try to do two things. One, I'll briefly introduce our work in this domain, agricultural robotics, but I'll use our examples as a kind of a way to introduce the field. And I think some of the challenges in agricultural robotics is very much related to what was discussed in the morning, and some of the hype cycles that we have been wondering about have already happened in agricultural robotics. So I think it might be interesting in that sense. But before that, agricultural robotics is not all we do, so I want to introduce my lab a little bit. So we work on these problems kind of at the intersection of robotics, actuation, sensing, and communication. And we spent a lot of time thinking about, the optimal placement of sensors, how to find things, how to localize the robot itself or track objects out in the field, and sometimes in a pursuit and evasion game theoretic context. And then we apply these to initially mostly in environmental monitoring. So I'll talk a little bit about this, but then we moved over to agricultural robotics, which this talk is dedicated to. And also I spent quite a bit of time thinking about home robotics, mainly in the Samsung context, but this is maybe for a different time. But of course, I'll just show you some videos, but as everyone knows, behind each video, there's the sweat, blood, bug bites, frost bites of generations of students. So this is all thanks to their hard work. And for many years, our motivation in the lab was to build some sort of a physical internet. So just like you query the web, could you actually go out and query physical world and ask about the nitrogen distribution over your farm, or track the moose in northern Minnesota, count your apples in your orchard. And the issue is these are difficult problems because the scale, on one hand, you're talking about animal territories, but then small objects like apples and so on. So that's one of the biggest challenges. And then the other thing is it involves both geometric information but also semantic information. You have to maybe differentiate an apple from a leaf and that sort of semantic information. So in the robotic telemetry domain, a lot of our work revolved around helping field scientists, many of whom actually track animals for their own studies. So this example is from Peter Sorensen's lab at University of Minnesota. And what they do is they actually track carp, which have radio tags in them, using a loopy antenna. And this is the work of two people usually, but we ended up building a sort of autonomous boat network. Those are about 6 feet wide boats, which collaborate and figure out where to collect information, how to localize the fish. And then a similar application for moose and bear, which are also tracked with tags, but then maybe you go and find the mother and count the calves and stuff like that. And for that, we build mainly aerial systems, which in this case, what they're doing is they're flying information so that they can actually actively localize the animals in the field. So then once we had this system, it was kind of an easy jump to agriculture. And what I'm going to I'll split my slides into two parts. One is more about sensing the farm, and then the other one will be about actuating. But before we start, just out of curiosity, how many of you heard of the term precision agriculture? Okay. What about high throughput phenotyping? Okay, so these are like two applications where there's a lot of talk about automation in the agricultural context, but they're fundamentally different because in precision agriculture, in a way, the customer is a farmer, which means that you're looking at a very large field, but it is mostly like uniform. The farmer plants the same crop, so this allows you to do like statistical things about, the water distribution, for example. Whereas in high throughput, in precision agriculture, the challenge is the scale. Like it is really, really large environment. But in high throughput phenotyping, your customer is in a way a scientist. So you might be looking at a smaller field, but every row in that field might have like a different genotype. And then the challenge is actually the precision because they measure certain phenotypes. And then the other sort of split is between row crops, corn, soy, wheat, versus specialty farms, apples, oranges, and then berries and things like that. So within this, there are 2 times 2, 4 combinations. So we started doing precision agriculture for row crops. This is about 15 years old footage now. The drones were just becoming popular. And the type of applications here are you collect, for example, near-infrared measurements, which are correlated with water stress and so on. So this line of work became commercial pretty quickly. And a lot of it is driven by data science, like more, the data processing things. In the context of robotics, for high throughput phenotyping, there's still a lot of work to do. So one of our recent projects was on, stem rust is a type of fungus, and detecting it on wheat is actually very challenging. And this is the type of setting where it's very hard to collect data, and even the experts cannot give you very clean annotations of the disease. So we've been doing this type of work, but our main claim to fame came from the sort of specialty crops domain, especially in apples. So in that domain, we developed these systems where you can fly through. So this is one of the first systems with onboard vision that can autonomously fly over the field. And then we developed our custom sort of stereopolarized LiDAR systems. What worked really well in practice is using these gators. That's an orange grow, I believe. And then we also did some experimental, can you come closer to the fruit for inspection? So then we used all this data to generate the kinds of things that scientists study, the tree volume, the trunk diameter, and so on and so forth. And then once we had this, we wanted to push this to the sort of precision agriculture domain where you could put it in the hands of farmers. So we launched a startup, Farm Vision Technologies, which gave this capability to the farmers. So you can just go out in a field and then collect footage on a cell phone maybe. And then we count your apples, give you the size. And to appreciate the challenge of this, imagine you go walk 100 meters in this way, and then you come around, and then you walk another 100 meters, and you have to avoid double counting the apple that you have seen on one side. So it is challenging. But yeah, and then the company afterwards, they also added like prediction models on top of this. So you can like predict your field based on your measurements and so on. And just to see the system in action, you can actually collect data at this speed. It is processed offline though, and you'll see the system, and now we give you like all this information. So that's for collecting the data and then giving information to the farmers or scientists. But what I realized is what really excites farmers is if you actually do work for them. So then we started thinking about, can we do actual manipulation on the farm? One of our first projects in this domain was a collaboration with Paul Fromm's group in Norway. So we ported our apple counter to a strawberry detector, and then together we worked on this manipulator and then put all these things together and built one of these sort of strawberry picker systems. And this type of setup is very common in Europe. They call them like tabletop systems. And there's a nice interplay, like things that are easy for humans. So one of the advantages of this setup is it's easy for humans to pick. It also makes it kind of easier for robots. One of our latest projects in this domain is this cowbot, we call it. So the way pastures in the north work is they actually have these like paddocks that are 1 or 2 acres, and then the cows graze, and then for 2 days, 1 or 2 days, and then they move it to the next one and so on. But in between, the cows eat the good stuff, and they leave these giant, whatever those things are, weeds, out. So somebody has to go and mow. So then we built a system which can go and do this mowing autonomously. And then another example is this mid-season weeding. So the significance of mid-season is, so early in the season, you can drive over the corn. And then later in the season, corn is strong enough that you don't have to worry about the weeds. But in between, when it is about like this high, the weeds can still compete with the plant. So somebody has to go and whack the weeds. So we built this system that can, not sure why it's not, so they can go under the canopy and then, count and detect the stamp. So we use 3 cameras to, localize exactly where you are, find the plants, and then come up with this. We experimented a lot with the actual weeding mechanism, and now what kind of worked in the end is we sort of retrofitted a real weed whacker, so then you go into the field and then it's supposed to. But this is where, for example, you really have to have high precision, because if you take out 10% of the farm doing this, the farmer will not be super happy. So these are just some examples. Let me tell you what I've been thinking about these days. One is, scale is a real challenge for these applications. And when you scale up, you have to maintain the precision as well. And of course, Texas is a great place in this sense. Everything is bigger, including the ranches. So, and if anyone knows any people who are interested in putting robots in their ranches, please let me know. There are many manipulation applications in the field beyond picking. As I mentioned, we did quite a bit of work more in this home domain. This is what we did at Samsung. But I'm hoping that some of these expertise, we can also use it for some other farm tasks. And then, in general, there's so many opportunities for optimization in the general supply chain. And these are all great, application domains for robotics. Well, I'll stop here. Thank you all for listening. And hopefully we have some time to talk.
Any questions?
When you're working with farmers, what's the difference after they've worked with you between people who are all in and they say, hey, this is great, we'd love to have more of this, and guys who say, oh, thanks, but I really need something else? What kind of results have you gotten back from people? What are their responses?
Yeah, I think those are, in a way, the easier cases. Because usually, in farms, what I've seen is there's usually the father who is like, nope, I don't need this, it doesn't work. And then there's usually the younger generation, which is like, oh, technology, this is so great, let's do it. But this kind of enthusiasm is also tricky for startups, right? Because then they're the early adopters, but it's not clear that they really need it. So I think as you gain some experience, you have to kind of find these actual pain points that people are willing to pay for. So it's both ways. You shouldn't get discouraged with the grumpiness, just like, what we see from the professors, right? But at the same time, not, get too, you should always be enthusiastic, but maybe too naive about the enthusiasm on that side too. So there's like a Goldilocks, interval in between.
We have time for one more question.
I wanted to ask how much time would you spend working as a team working on the simulation versus actually implementing and getting experiments with the actual device?
So for what I showed, we don't really do much in simulation, so 0. But now, for example, as we, one thing that I'm very interested in these days is motion planning with dynamics involved. Because one thing we learned, if the terrain is very rough and you want to go fast, your big mower will tip over, right? So then for that, we started looking into using simulators for our fast motion planners and things like that. But I can't give you a percentage. Yeah. Simulation, there are places where it's very, very helpful. But at the same time, if you're, for example, trying to use simulation to understand the effect of noise, you have to be very careful about whether you're actually doctoring the noise and making your system work under the same assumptions that and whether the world will have the same distribution and so on. So, anyways, we're good? Okay. Thank you all very much. I'm around if